I don't know, maybe, is it possible that Mr. Trump's policies will somehow work? It's not a zero probability. It could be. I can't predict the future any better than anyone else can, but I wouldn't bet on it. I don't think it's going to work. I think he's going to have more and more disappointment and upset, and he will be busy blaming this scapegoat, that scapegoat, to excuse the fact that it doesn't work. But the irony is, and I say this as a critic of Mr. Trump, that's not his fault. What he's trying to do isn't going to work. One final illustration. Mr. Biden, Mr. Clinton, Mr. Obama, both father and son in the Bush family, all promised in their campaigns for president to bring manufacturing back to the United States. They all promised it. None of them delivered it. Therefore, it would be very naive to believe that Mr. Trump is going to be able to do what none of them were able to do. Is it true that he's going further, going to more extreme efforts? Yes, he is. To his credit, he clearly understood that the others failed. But I must tell you, looking at what he's trying to do, I don't think so. And if I had to point to a single reason, it goes to your question. It's because for the first time in a century, the United States has a serious economic competitor. I like to remind people, and boy, the Europeans seem to need it these days. That may not include the Norwegians, I don't know, but in any case, the GDP of the United States, as I said before, 25, 26, $27 trillion. The GDP of Russia today, maybe 4 trillion. In other words, the United States and Russia were never economic competitors. Russia was much too poor. The notion of the world divided between the United States and Russia was a caricature. Should never have been taken seriously by anybody. Did the Russians have nuclear weapons? Yes. Did that make them a more serious adversary? Yes. But economically, no. That's why even today, these notions that the Russians are the ones that have to be held back as soon as the war in Ukraine is over, they will be cut. This is the Cold War craziness that has to stop at some point, because it is phony. It is a misunderstanding. And this is not a support for the Russians. You know, I'm not a fan of Mr. Putin or anything like that, but it's just looking at the reality. You can't sustain war without an economic foundation. Every war shows that. You know, the Russians have worked very hard to have a big military, and look at them. Are they winning in Ukraine? Absolutely. Will they win this war? They already have. But it is taking them now 3 years, and they are 10 times the size of Ukraine. And yes, the Ukraine's having a lot of help from the Europeans and the Americans, but nonetheless, look at the limits of what Russia can do. And it has mobilized 1 million people to add to its military in order to fight this war. They can't fight Europe. It's silly. They can't. They can't even fight Ukraine and Poland at the same time, let alone. That's just propaganda, which is so bad that it's being believed even by the people who should know better, because they understand these things. So for me, this is the setting for the so-called trade war. And the most important thing about it, and I say this as an economist, is not this or that tariff. It's the uncertainty. It's the fact that Mr. Trump says it's going to be a tariff, then there isn't one. Now it's 25%. Well, now it's 10%. Now it's 200%. Now this is impossible. What this does is negate what the whole tariff was supposed to do. I'll give you a simple example. If you're a manufacturer of automobile parts and you have a factory in Mexico, which many of them do, you did that over the last 30 years because of NAFTA, because of the agreement that goods can flow from Mexico into the US, like from Canada, into one another of the three countries without a tariff, without any obstacle, free trade. So you could take advantage of the much lower wages in Mexico, produce it there, put it on a truck, and drive it across the border into Texas. No problem. Very profitable. They all did that. Okay, if you put a tariff, which Mr. Trump has said he's going to do, against all goods coming from Mexico into the United States, you're doing away with those profits. And the idea, we're supposed to believe, is that the company with the factory making the goods in Mexico will now move the factory into the United States, making the Mexican workers unemployed and giving jobs to Americans instead. But here's why it won't work. Even if the tariffs stayed in place, the problem is that the American worker remains much higher paid than the Mexican. So how is the American company, or any company, European company, how are they going to make a living because they avoid the tariff, but they have to pay the much higher wages? This is a very iffy proposition. But even that is not the end of the story. The end of the story is you don't know whether this tariff will be in effect next week, next month, next year. And so you're not going to make a very expensive, time-consuming movement of your factory from outside to the United States when there's so much uncertainty. You could end up spending a fortune, move your factory, lose business for 2 years as you move it, only to discover that the tariff that provoked your movement is no longer in place. Why not? Because Mr. Trump is bargaining. He wants benefits, and he will, in exchange, get rid of the tariffs or lower them very drastically. Because you don't know. It may be much, much less expensive to pay a 10% tariff than to undertake the movement of a factory, which is very likely to be the case in many, many industries. So all of this is very iffy, very questionable, very much not a cut and dry thing.